Back with more NBA coverage, and in this one, the main focus is to really rein in the true NBA offseason. Of course, the NBA Finals have ended with the Knicks winning to this point, and over the past week and some change, there have been a number of developments, some still in season, and most occurring out of that specific place, just to assert teams' desires or pursuits to either extend potential rebuilds in ways, prolong the tenures of a few coaches, and even take some risks, some heavy risks and potential rewards on a brand new hire, in the case of one that just broke, but I will most certainly get into later on. And man, I can't wait to talk about that. There have also been a few contract extensions over the course of this time, as some players proved themselves enough last season to at least warrant some consideration for a shorter-term investment, offering them a bit of job security for at least the next few years. Before I get into talking about any of that, though, the main thing to establish right now is that per Shams Charania earlier this morning, it was mentioned that the ongoing Giannis saga, in regards to the Bucks potentially finding a trade partner for him, in many cases the idea has been that they've needed to go for a multi-team deal in order to make all of the money work out, considering how expensive Giannis' contract is. Per Charania earlier, he stated that a trade involving Giannis would be done prior to the NBA draft, which is tomorrow. So no, this is not a report on a trade taking place. But what this does conclude is that keep your ears peeled and keep your eyes open for any of that material, because quite frankly, with that timeline, anywhere over the course of the next 32 hours or so, we could see a deal in place, sending Giannis to a brand new team for the first time in his career. So that's just something I wanted to just get out of the way now, just establish that first and foremost. But outside of the Giannis saga, we start with the Hawks extending Quin Snyder and signing him on a multi-year contract extension. Honestly, as soon as this was reported per Shams Charania, I figured that it made a lot of sense for what the Hawks needed. And it goes to show me how exactly a team in this scenario that is at least starting to trend in the right direction can put more of their trust in a coach who has brought them all the way there. Consider this, in the 2022 season, Snyder came in as an interim, and year over year, there have been slight improvements. Now, the Hawks have consistently medaled, but it obviously reached a great overall outcome in 2025, where they saw, quite frankly, the first bit of success they've had in quite a while, going all the way back to the 2022 year, or 2021 rather, with Trae Young at the helm, leading them all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals before they bowed out, ironically enough, to the Bucks. The Hawks show a lot of promise. I mean, you have yourself one of the most improved, in fact, two most improved player candidates in Jalen Johnson and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, having spectacular seasons last year. Onyeka Okongwu provides you with great contributions as a two-way stretch shooter who can provide you with solid interior defense. And you have a lot of other wings at your disposal. Your Dyson Daniels, of course, runner-up for DPOY in 2024, on top of so many other young assets that just make this Atlanta team kind of dangerous moving forward. At least in the notion that they can continue to take massive strides forward. And that's really the key. You know, they may still underrate the Eastern Conference a little bit, and other teams at the top of their powers. Obviously, they were demolished, dominated by the Knicks. As I said, when it comes to dealing with something like that, even in Snyder's position, who obviously had to coach the team through all of this, it is about how you drive from that game that will tell the tale of this next era of Hawks basketball. That can either break them completely, and you have the Hawks just coming out in the regular season, getting off to a slow start that they can't recover from as a result of that 51-point loss in Game 6. Or you can get back to the drawing board immediately, which I believe that Quin Snyder has done. You can get all of these players in practice mode instantly and just jog the idea in their minds that as long as they continue to put the work in behind the scenes, that is something that they can correct in the long haul. This is really the game plan for the Hawks right now. Quin Snyder has obviously been on teams, especially in Utah, where they had all the number one seeds for years in a row, where there have been championship expectations placed on him. And of course, the story about those Utah teams was that they were not able to get over the hump in those scenarios. The Hawks could still be a year or so away from true championship expectations. I don't think that the plan for them right now is to immediately assert themselves as a top 5 or so candidate for a championship run in the Eastern Conference. But they are certainly poised to continue making as much noise as they have up to this point. So, bringing in Snyder, retaining him for that service specifically, to me is important. He has done wonders for this team for the 4 years that he's been there, even if a 132 and 135 overall record don't necessarily show that from the standpoint of the record itself. You see, the development that all these young players have gone through, it's a testament to the system that Quin Snyder has implemented. And here the Hawks are in a display of trust without any restriction on their end in Quin Snyder. They're showing him that we've seen what you've done over the past 4 years for us. We believe in the system that you're implementing, and we think that in time, maybe not immediately, but in time, we can, under your tutelage, get our players into a spot where they do start competing for titles and where they continue to be some of the best players in the NBA, point blank, period. That is the rise that this Hawks team had been on overall. I don't think anyone prior to last season, aside from themselves in ways, especially when you saw Jalen Johnson and what he put out there in 24-25 prior to his injury, like that was probably something to where it's like, okay, we could have seen a step forward from Jalen Johnson in the upcoming year. But the fact that this team as a whole played that well together, especially in the second half of the season, by the way. Like, mind you, they did not have the strongest start. And they were still just a near 500 team with a near 500 record for literally decades in a row up to that point. That was the kind of streak that they'd been on, and they turned it around in the second half of the season to get to that 5th seed in the Eastern Conference, or rather 6th seed. So, man, from that to a playoff team, if you could put that together over an entire year, there could even be more that the Hawks could unlock about themselves. And that is a sign that, quite frankly, other teams in the league would have to watch out for, would have to be attentive to. And it's all thanks in ways all across the board to, again, the culture that Quin Snyder has started to implement. Now, there are some things that will have to be sorted out, because rotations could still be an issue. And there have been countless things surrounding a player like Jonathan Kuminga, for example, who has kind of gotten lost in the fire, and especially after the usage he acquired in the initial week and two following the trade that sent him to Atlanta from Golden State. You also have Zachary Rizalche trying to recapture his role after essentially losing a stronghold on it over the course of the year and then barely logging any minutes when it counted. One of the last times he ended up playing was that Game 6, and it didn't end up mattering. By that point, the Hawks had already conceded the game pretty much, and Dyson Daniels had literally gotten ejected. So you really did not have a lot of other options than to put in Zachary Rizalche, and even then at that point, he wasn't producing. That is the struggle that Snyder, in a way, is going to have to deal with. Because even if that goal might not be to, elevate into championship contenders right now, this team is clearly trying to win. And so, how do you calculate the idea of winning at a much higher level while at the same time balancing that out with the development of your young players? Because, mind you, Atlanta themselves, they do have a lot of young talent as it is. And while they did screw themselves out of some draft picks, at the end of the day, you still have a good amount of draft capital to utilize here if you ever needed to. So they have to balance that out. But it's been an interesting career for Quin Snyder up to that point, and he extends it now with a multi-year deal with this Atlanta team. I wasn't even aware that he was almost 60 years old, by the way. I thought he was much younger than that, but I was wrong. Nevertheless, no matter how old he is, he's clearly the right person for the team. And considering what I'm about to get into when it comes to a different coaching situation, at least they understood that they had the right guy for what they need at this particular moment in time on their side. At least they understood that. Because, man, if other teams did, they'd be in much better positions right now. Moving on to some different news, though. Speaking of the Knicks, and by all accounts, this is a fairly serious situation, although no one did end up getting hurt from this. The Knicks put such a number on James Harden, hunting him in clutch time, picking on him on the offensive end and forcing him into turnovers, literally smacking the shit out of the Cavaliers and mopping the floor with them. They put such a root on James Harden that in this offseason, he decided that in one way, shape, or form, he was going to get his get back. Trauma was triggered for Harden at that point, and he decided that he was going to patrol around Houston, Texas with a weapon. According to this article from the AP and other sources as well, Cleveland Cavaliers player James Harden was arrested on Saturday in Houston on a misdemeanor charge of unlawful carrying of a weapon in a motor vehicle, according to the Harris County District Clerk's office. This would be Saturday, June 13th, end quote. As it continues, Harden was arrested at 3:41 a.m. and booked just before 5 a.m., then posted $100 bond and was released from police custody, according to charging documents which said he had a handgun in plain view that was not in a holster, end quote. They said countless crazy things about this Harden arrest and then release in regards to this. Again, the most important thing to note is that no one got hurt. This was him just carrying this around in a motor vehicle. At least it was only restricted to that, thank goodness. But it's not something that can be done, suppose, in the state of Texas. And we've seen this story countless times. I mean, you've had other NFL players as well arrested for doing similar things, having just mere possession of it in a motor vehicle. Depends on the laws in the state, usually. And Texas is not permitting any of that activity whatsoever. You made no effort to do anything with it. They said that this is in plain view, and it was not in a holster for the sake of protection. No, it's literally just out and about. On that pretense, you have to do something at that point, because any number of things could go down. I don't think that they had any information or whether or not the weapon in question that Harden possessed was loaded or anything like that, but there's a real possibility that it was. And in that event, again, without it being in a holster, just sitting around in a moving car, again, there are so many different random outcomes that can happen. And if there really was an intent to cause and inflict harm with said weapon, although it didn't get to that point, you just have to think, it's easy access to just grab it and then do whatever, which would not be beneficial to any party involved, whether it be Harden or whether it be just an innocent person out on the street or someone else in a different car. So while I am in my position and not necessarily saying that those things are going down, you'd have to imagine that authorities in this case were likely thinking, just for the safety reasons alone, that a move had to be made, an arrest had to be made here. And you have to set an example. Again, no one in cases like these is above the law. Now, they're treating this as a misdemeanor, and as the CBS Sports article states, quote, in Texas, unlawful carrying of a weapon is typically a Class A misdemeanor, which can carry up to 1 year in county jail and a fine of up to $40,000. So, the penalty itself, compared to other crimes and stuff out there, it isn't as severe, but it's not legal in Texas. It is going to serve in some way as a bit of a hindrance in your ability to live your own life in a way when you are attempting to do things like this. And it's always in a situation like this, even for Harden, who again is going on 37 years old, it is literally about being careful. You literally have to move smarter than that, generally, let alone when you're an athlete. So they have to keep the same energy here. That's the main thing. But again, not much other information came out of it aside from that, because I read it at the time of which it initially happened, or was reported to have happened, from Shams Charania and other sources as well. You just hope that this action isn't repeated by James Harden, regardless of what the results may end up being. As other articles have stated as well, quote, he was released on bond and is scheduled to appear in court on June 22nd at 9 a.m. Central Time. That's today. and with it being Central Time, I'm sure that this is about to go down pretty soon as of the recording of this video. So, can look back into this later and see if there is any, true smoke to this, if anything really is taken away from the situation when it comes to this court hearing. But we genuinely don't have an answer for that right now. All we can say is that, Harden has been released on bond and is likely preparing for this case now. Just cannot be moving like that, though. Seriously. You just never truly know. You never know. Alright, moving on to the Bulls. Because they honestly made for themselves a pretty good coaching hire, in their own respect. Picking up Tiago Splitter. Yeah, that Tiago Splitter. The main thing and the right thing to do in this scenario, first and foremost, is to give all the credit to Tiago Splitter. I mean, the fact that, again, on such short notice last season, when he had quite frankly never been put in the position of head coach at any point in his staffing career up to that point, on such short notice after the Billups thing, he goes into Portland and does what he does for that team last year. Nobody expected Portland to really be in contention for anything last season. They were a rebuilding team, they said, and it looked the part. And over the year, they even brought back Damian Lillard. He didn't even appear on the court. And yet still, through it all, with the help of a lot of other players, namely Deni Avdija, Scoot Henderson, put together a pretty solid output when he returned from injury. And just an assortment of different casts and characters here. This Portland team went all the way from being one of the flat-out worst in the league in 24-25 to earning themselves a playoff spot after beating the Suns in the play-in for the 7th seed. Now, of course, it might not have ended in the way that they wanted, but the fact that they were in the playoffs in the first place, having to face off against San Antonio in the first place, that in and of itself meant something, and they came away with a playoff win in that series. Even if it resulted in a gentleman's sweep by the end of the series, they still won a game. So, I mean, it does not get much better than that. You're sitting on gold if you're Portland. And for whatever reason, out the door he goes. But Splitter, keeping his hopes up, keeping his head on a swivel, seeing where he lands, he finds himself in Chicago. As I stated pretty much, this will be the first time he's now been made the guy. One of the younger head coaches, I would believe, he'll enter this season at the age, he will turn 42 during the season. He was born on New Year's Day in 1985. He, for the years prior, had spent time mainly as an assistant coach in Brooklyn and also Houston for 1 year in 2023-2024. Never had he been asked to be the leading man in a locker room. And he still took it on the chin. Showed a countless number of teams, I guess by that logic, with that being a bit of a trial, a bit of a mock to what he could actually put forth as a coaching figure in a particular organization. The Bulls must have liked what they saw. And I do believe that this is a hire that can work out similarly for Chicago, who themselves for years have been meddling. They have kind of looked as though, with moving on from some of their guys, as though they themselves might finally be picking a direction. And whatever the case may be, whether they're trying to rebuild or just trying to salvage something reasonable out of this season, upcoming in the years to come, they trust Tiago Splitter to weather that storm. He's shown you that. He's shown you that he can do it with the Trailblazers, and the Bulls are in a similar position. One of the first things I was saying was that I was genuinely intrigued to learn over time how he would go about utilizing Matas Buzelis. After all, Buzelis was a recent lottery pick for this Bulls team. Now, he was brought in a situation where, you still have, at the time, you're dealing with Zach LaVine still being there prior to the trade deadline in 2025. You still have Nikola Vucevic on that very roster. And his rookie season would definitely align with that, because it frankly wasn't all that great. And some of it is on him, trying to get his feet wet, not necessarily having the ability yet that you'd expect. But at the same time, his output overall took a few notable steps last year, and it culminated in him starting all 77 games. He played the 4 position, and he put up 16.3 points per game, along with 5.8 rebounds. Now, I'm not saying that he is automatically going to turn into this player, but we'd seen a guy in Deni Avdija get all the way from a Washington team that was flat out terrible, putting up decent numbers, and then going through the transition process, moving over to Portland, ultimately turning himself into an all-star last season. And that was also under Tiago Splitter's system. So there are endless possibilities with the things that Splitter can make possible for Buzelis in whatever offense he tries to enlist. And whether he is playing the 3 or the 4, I'd expect him at this point to get a good number of touches. Same thing for Josh Giddey as well. Now, they RFA'd him at a point, and, Giddey is one of those players who needs the ball in his hands to really operate well. It did not necessarily work out all the time, but the best chance for the Bulls up to this point, once they moved on from all these established players, was to allow Josh Giddey to facilitate this offense. And there had been some success with it. So now there's a possibility with Splitter being there for him to lean into this even further or potentially dial it back. And I guess the hunch would be for him to lean into it further. Josh Giddey, after all this time, still does have something to prove, in a way. And it does, frankly, begin with him improving his outside shot. Now, granted, his 2 years in Chicago, compared to what was going on with the Thunder, it's been leaps and bounds better. But I still think that teams out there are not going to respect the jumper. It starts with that. There's no question about Josh Giddey's playmaking ability, though. He can certainly do that at a high level. And I'd expect Tiago Splitter to find a way to work around that. There's so many different assets that the Bulls have at this point. And granted, they may move on from some of those guys. They could very well add to that tomorrow with the NBA draft. To have a new voice in that locker room who has now proven, even after just one season, even with a limited sample size, that he has high leadership quality. Excellent leadership quality. That changes everything in and of itself for that Bulls roster. They had been in flux for years, especially under that previous regime, with them firing their head coach and president of basketball operations at the time, earlier, near the end of the regular season. Once that move was made, the door was open for them to go after a new head coach if they so chose. And so far, potentially so good for this new regime to endorse a head coach like Tiago Splitter. I mean, it works out perfectly. You know, you don't take much of a risk on bringing in an established head coach, per se. Like, it had helped the Bulls, without question, to get themselves a top-of-the-line head coach who is a surefire candidate to be regarded as one of the more elite coaches out there. The thing is, an elite caliber coach probably would not want to take on the Bulls right now because of them still being split in two different hairs. And if they were to be going on a rebuild this season, coaches aren't likely going to want to deal with that. What the hell do you think the Monty Williams dysfunction and discontent with the Pistons was about? That is literally, in terms of recent hires, one of the models of just what you don't want in a coaching hire for a rebuild. Because this man, Monty Williams, quite literally just been part of a championship-led Suns team. And he might have been scapegoated and sent over to Detroit. That's fair. But he clearly was not up for the task of trying to string along all these different players, knowing the kind of resume he'd put out there at the time as another head coach on the rise. Splitter is in a unique position where, with that small sample size, and with him just coming from a youthful Blazers team, you're getting virtually the same thing with Chicago. You're getting virtually the same thing. Like, the future, in theory, looks bright, but they are trying to allow that to kick in. And so Splitter, hopefully for them, is the one to bridge that gap. And if that is how it goes, for at least the next few years, potentially a decade even, you get yourself a man who is going to have this team operating like clockwork, year in, year out, day out, through practices, through other off-season activities, and so on and so forth. That is the potential that you can get out of Tiago Splitter, and by proxy, having him instill that in the young guys. Still trying to learn the NBA. Obviously, Splitter was a former player as well, so he gets it, even if he might not have been an elite player in his heyday. He understands, more than most people, what it would take. After all, he was a part of those Spurs teams. All tying back in to the Spurs way. So, ultimately, it's about taking those growing steps, but when they are in position to, you can understand that Splitter is going to do what it takes to win. And that's important. So again, all respect to Splitter, and hopefully things work out there. Credit to the Bulls for making a smart move. But as I said from the jump, the Blazers are idiots in letting Tiago Splitter walk. And namely, the owner, Tom Dundon, is a fucking idiot for not being willing to spend any of his money whatsoever on retaining Tiago Splitter's services. Oh, but he would have been too expensive. You wouldn't have to pay him that much per se. But if he does happen to be a little more expensive than you thought, what the fuck is the problem? This is the best coach you've had with Portland probably since Terry Stotts. So that goes back a few years. Chauncey Billups, even as a former player, didn't give you that same level of success over the past few years. And here comes Splitter instantly doing that. And you hold no value in that whatsoever. You just think you can cheaply pay him and lowball an offer for him in order to retain his services. And I guess if there were negotiations, frankly, he wasn't going for that. Why should he? Why should he? That is such a missed opportunity on their part, and they know it. If money was an issue, the Hurricanes, the franchise that he owns in the NHL, they just won the fucking Stanley Cup. And I can guarantee you that the valuation for that franchise, after something of that magnitude, would probably go up at least a few $1 million, if not more. You're telling me that even with that in mind, you still don't have it in you to just concede that you've got a great head coach sitting there on your team. He's there for the taking. If you would just hunker down and give him the money, and you still refuse to do that, that is complete and utter nonsense. Just bullshit on their part. I cannot believe that. It's just pathetic, man. Like, the future of your organization is already on your roster. You already have him in hand. That is an advantage that you'd have on most other NBA teams. All you got to do is get down to the drawing board and give him an offer that he can't refuse, or work with him enough to make this offer mutually beneficial, if it even has to be like that. Whatever it takes. You do not allow an individual like that to slip through your hands. And unfortunately for the Blazers, unfortunately for Dundon, he gone. Now what? Because to the Blazers to this point have not made a decision on getting a replacement. And with what I will detail later in regards to a very recent hire that again just broke before this video even started, in some ways, some of the best coaches in the NBA, or at least people in the NBA perceived to be even better coaches than Tiago Splitter, were still passed up several times over. Now again, when it comes to these coaching hires, right, you really are at times just throwing darts at the board trying to make something stick. So no hire is ever really a guarantee, aside from those coaches that are just generally one of one, like your Greg Popovich's, like your Steve Kerr's. Those are like sure things. You're not going to question that. Your Don Nelsons, for example, from a more historical standpoint, Like, those are surefire caliber hires. You're not going to question those for a second. You aren't finding that too much in this current cycle of coaches. Sometimes it is quite literally about taking risks and hoping that they pay off. Like the Lakers literally signing JJ Redick without having any coaching experience himself outside of coaching his kids. And you still don't have it in you to say that, you know what, seeing all of that, maybe we just do take a stab at hiring Tiago Splitter. No, they fucking don't. Not even for a second. That's how they're going to be thinking. Good luck for them. I'd be very interested to see about who they bring in. And maybe that news will come in at some point as well down the line. I can't imagine that they'd be much better whether or not they have more years of experience than the opportunities Tiago Splitter could provide for you. Simple as that. Moving on to some contracts. Trae Young, to start things out, would decline his $48.97 million player option. And it's unfortunate for Trae Young, you know? I just cannot imagine in a situation like this, even with him declining his player option, which means that he'd likely enter the market if he so chose, what team would go after him on the market? He just hasn't played. He only played 5 games with the Wizards. And this was after the trade deadline, a trade deadline of which saw Trae Young's value pretty much next to nothing before he even got sent to Washington in the first place. If that was the sentiment before he got to the Wizards and then only played 5 games with them on efficiency that was all right, but was still too small of a sample size compared to everything else that had been said about him, how exactly would his trade value all of a sudden rise up now? Why would other teams now decide, even after that declined player option, to now pick up Trae Young with a number of different combinations of assets? I just don't see the worth in that happening, quite frankly. It's hard to really believe that that could go down. I just could not imagine them making that decision at this point. So it puts Trae Young in an awkward position. Like, you know, think about this, man. He's supposed to be pretty much in the middle of his prime. He'll be 28 on September 19th. He, last season, literally, the year before in 2024, 2025, led the league in assists with 11.6. And had been averaging a 24 and 10 pretty much double-double for the last 3 seasons. Damn near 4. The focal point of that Atlanta offense for such a long time. And of course, that removes some of the context, right? The defense was historically bad. They were literally on pace. The Hawks, before Trae Young was let go, to be statistically the worst defensive rated team in NBA history by that specific metric. I think it was at over 130 points per game. It was that drastic with having Trae Young on the court. That's been the story. There just aren't enough ways, if any at all, to really mask his defensive liabilities. And then as his efficiency on offense started to diminish completely and also get in the way of how all of their other younger players were operating. it just made life in Atlanta for Trae Young, I guess after that point, very on the fritz. And that's why the move ultimately had to be made. As unfortunate as it is. So here we have Trae Young, a guy who was ultimately viewed as one of the promising young guards of this recent generation of players, just trending in all the wrong directions here. Like, I don't know. Like, the very likely thing, even with him declining his player option, is that he'd stay in Washington and just try to thug it out. And even then, that's like, stay in Washington? Stay in Washington? Well, like, that is a lot to ask. And with the Wizards having the number 1 overall pick, Trae Young may not even end up being as much of a factor for the next phase of their operation, depending on who they draft. Which, they've been mocked to take A.J. DeBonsa. We all saw A.J. DeBonsa's reaction to them getting the number 1 overall pick. We all saw it. There's a top 3. There's a consensus top 3. So, they have their pick. Because they literally set the tone for what the rest of this draft looks like tomorrow night. If they go guard, and they go Darren Peterson, namely, because the report has been as well from different sources that he doesn't want to be in Utah. And of course, the same thing was being said about Ace Bailey, and we saw how that ended up. Anyways, if they go guard, I can't imagine that it bodes well for Trae Young. Hell, they already said, with what I was reading from a couple of different articles on like mock drafts and things of that nature, when it came to the Wizards, they were already talking about them attempting to develop Trey Johnson III more, who happens to be another guard on that team. And of course, he lit up the scene as a freshman at Texas, which is what led to him being drafted by this Wizards team last year. That's fair. I just, there wouldn't be too much room at that point if this is what they're trying to focus on. Immediately getting impact out of their young players, or at least trying to forge something of that realm so they can make things at least exciting to watch in Washington, even if they still won't be winning all that much. And Trae Young may still be there to set the tone, but even if he is there to help, is he going to be available enough? That's a genuine conversation now to have and pontificate at this point, because we genuinely don't know enough. We're moving on from that into another player option, because Kentavious Caldwell-Pope exercised his, and his was worth $21.6 million. Just a bit of a down year for KCP, to be quite honest with you. I mean, here we are having expected him to take over the Desmond Bane role, essentially. That is why he was sent over in that deal. And although in theory, you'd like to see that 3-point percentage from Kentavious Caldwell-Pope be on par, at the same time, the year in Memphis continued what has been a bit of a downward spiral for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, quite frankly, since the 2021 year. Now, of course, it fared out okay for him in Denver. I mean, he got the fucking championship ring in 2023 with a team. And you're never going to say that a season like that is a failure. But he has seen his numbers drop each and every single year since that 2021-2022 season with Washington. Right. And last year, it was just another decline. His 8.4 points per game ended up being the second lowest mark behind his rookie season in terms of that metric. He plummeted to just 31.6% shooting from the three-point line, which wasn't even on par with what the Grizzlies were expecting. And even with Desmond Bane looking at times to be a weird fit with the Orlando team, he still far outperformed Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in that respect. Far outperformed him. It wasn't even close. Not to mention that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope could not make it through the full year because unfortunately he'd gotten hurt. He had a right pinky finger injury and he missed the rest of the 2025-26 year from that point moving forward, finishing with just 51 games played in 14 starts. Now, the Grizzlies team as a whole was not all that great last year. It is fair to say that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope being looked at as the key in all of this return and being looked at as a guy who could get them out of that rut, he did not help the cause much. He just didn't. That's just the truth. So I'm not sure how much the Grizzlies are expecting there. He's going to stay with the team. And with the going rate for role players being near that at times, especially for the high-end ones, maybe it's team-friendly for him to take this option on and try to reestablish himself as one of the best 3-and-D guys the league has to offer. But again, with what we saw last year, that was not even remotely on display for him. So we cannot sit here and act as though it was. What you can say, though, is that for the Suns, they themselves got pretty active. Aside from having Devin Booker earlier in the offseason officially change his jersey number to 15, they signed a couple of players to contract extensions. The first would be Collin Gillespie, who signed a 4-year, $48 million contract extension. And I think that for him, that's a great sign. Consider where Gillespie was at. They'll say, okay, he did win the championship with the Nuggets. He was not viewed as an important player for that organization. In fact, in that year, he did not even play in a single game whatsoever. He did not register a single minute during that year, despite having the championship. And with the Nuggets being on that win-now timeline even to that point, it was still hard for him to really warrant a lot of attention. So while his minutes did take an increase in 2023-24, it's not like he was viewed as important and highly valuable for this team. So he's then sent over to the Phoenix for the 24-25 year. And even still, he earned more minutes despite the Suns as well also trying to get ever closer to that championship appearance, despite somehow believing that a trio of KD, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker could get it done. Didn't even come remotely close to that. Gillespie was always going to be one of the older guards in the game. I mean, he was a 23-year-old rookie, pretty much, by the time he entered into the league. So you could argue that his ability to make an impact immediately with these kinds of teams, especially if he was expected to be NBA ready, considering he was at that age, the odds are always going to be stacked against him. And yet you still get what happened last season, where despite it all, despite him being nearly out of the rotation in seasons prior, despite him not being in the rotation in his rookie year, he managed to nearly triple his production last season, getting all the way up to 12.7 points per game, along with 41.8% shooting from the field and 40% shooting from deep, as a great specialist for them in that department. And the Suns, outside of that, especially with having Grayson Allen hurt at times as well, they had struggled with that component of their game. And Gillespie, especially when it came to him popping off those screens for catch and shoot plays, time and time again, especially in games later in the year, as he would also put up what I think was his first 30-point game after a while also. Like, he arrived, in a way, for this Suns team. He'd arrived. So, at most with Collin Gillespie, you may not get a player who's going to light up the score sheet for you, but you are getting a player who, on higher volume, much higher volume, he shot 7.2 threes per game and still was that accurate. So now you had Grayson Allen serving that. You can also have Collin Gillespie, and they started him at times. They brought him off the bench no matter what. He was just coming in, giving them those good spot minutes and firing completely left and right into the hoop for timely 3-point makes throughout the year. It is genuinely life-changing for Collin Gillespie to now be in this spot, considering that he came from Villanova, and I'd seen him at times play at Villanova. You know, it might not have been thought that this was possible for him, in a way. But he'd been able to shake off that narrative about him, and now he can say that for the next 4 years or so, he could be a part of a Suns team looking to now be led solely by Devin Booker in a way, and ultimately find a way to at least go on deeper playoff runs. We all understand how the series ended against OKC earlier in the playoffs. It was not particularly in doubt for that team. We all understood after a while who was going to get it there, and they promptly got swept. But taking that into stride and learning from it is going to be the most important thing. Gillespie as well at times also proved to be a very good facilitator. And in those starts alongside Devin Booker, that could alleviate the pressure off of him a little bit. Now, Gillespie is fairly small, but knowing that you could get that out of Collin Gillespie and give Devin Booker even more room to operate, that is another thing that you'd hope could really be incorporated in this upcoming year. Because as long as Devin Booker is getting those opportunities, and you can clear away the possibility of any double team or anything like that, you give Devin Booker the room and space he needs to get in that isolation, get inside that post, and do what he does best, man. Like, literally, it does not get much better and more fitting for the Suns in that case. It just does not. And then they'd also sign Jordan Goodwin to a 3-year, $19 million contract extension. Jordan Goodwin's thing is mainly about the hustle. And although it wasn't perfect, especially when it gets to him being in LA for that stint in 2024-25, some Lakers fans still hate him for the shit he pulled with that team. But yeah, with that kind of energy and intensity he plays with, off the bench especially. He started in just 10 games for the Suns last year, and yet offered them some all-around energy off the in a restricted role. I mean, 8.7 points, 2.2 assists, 4.9 rebounds, 1.5 steals, and 41.3% shooting. Like, that's not going to tell the full tale. But some of the different games where when you'd sub him in, the complexion of the team just changed, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And considering that Jordan Goodwin stands at only 6'3", if he's giving you that, and you're a teammate, how could you not be galvanized by that and decide to play much harder defensively than you typically would? Like, it's hard to see that and not want to replicate it in some way. So, from that standpoint, I mean, man, like, it's very low leverage. Goodwin himself will be 28 on October 23rd. And you aren't expecting the craziest effort from Jordan Goodwin at all when it comes to, being a complete weapon on offense or a complete weapon from defense. But he is going to at least be able to work around a little bit and get himself involved in several different ways by simply doing the little things. And after the failure that the Suns had subjected themselves to, they kind of needed that spirit in themselves to play accountable and truly hold one another accountable. So yeah, those aren't crazy deals for either of those guys. But in their own unique ways, they were able to help the Suns get to the playoffs before they met their fate against the Thunder. The Suns will be looking to at least get to that level again. They're going to need a bit more, generally, from all parties involved. But at least with these two, they're damn good role players that do deserve another opportunity, another shot to get in their bidding with this team. And that's what these contracts boil down to. The Hawks themselves would sign C.J. McCollum to a 1-year, $21 million deal with a trade kicker. Just hearing that alone, it makes me feel as though McCollum might already be a trade deadline candidate. And that's kind of crazy. Yeah, we'll give you this deal to make money work for this season. And we also still have the rights to involve you in a trade if we so choose. That is just the business side of the NBA in a nutshell. And that's despite at least how the series started against the Knicks with the things that C.J. McCollum put together alone by himself to lead that team to a 2-1 lead. Like, literally. He, aside from other Atlanta players, he was the main culprit in why they found themselves in that position. Not Jalen Johnson, who had been inefficient up to that point. Not Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who had been inefficient up to that point. Onyeka Okongwu was decent. Dyson Daniels had been inefficient up to that point. It was mainly C.J. McCollum. Especially with big shots towards the tail end of respective games. It was that man, not anybody else. and yet still loyalty is not there at all for him. Maybe it shouldn't be. Again, if the focus is to continue to build on their youth and use it to their advantage, CJ McCollum might not fit that timeline. Although I'm sure that with the things he did after the trade deadline trade sent him to Atlanta from the Wizards here, having that veteran presence and one who was also the president of the NBA PA once upon a time, like, you're getting nothing but great insight from CJ McCollum. And that is an invaluable part of having him on this team. I suppose the Hawks themselves aren't thinking too deeply about that, though. He had been pretty solid in Atlanta after the trade deadline, appearing in 41 games throughout the year with this Hawks team in the regular season and putting up 18.7 points per game, along with 4.1 assists per game on 45.6% shooting. In that realm, CJ McCollum's been fairly consistent. Like they mentioned, he was able to, for that many years in a row, average 20 and was never named to an All-Star game, but was given a Most Improved Player award. So it's just wild to find him in yet another spot like this, despite having a pretty good playoff series. The Hawks will be looking, in a way, to get their hands on a younger guard, though. Regardless of, if they keep CJ McCollum or they do incorporate that trade kicker in and ship him somewhere else, a young guard is going to have to step in and make things complete for them, especially as a shooter and facilitator. Because Dyson Daniels can at the very least slash the rim, and he can pass with the best of them, but he is still not a three-point shooter right now. And maybe CJ McCollum can help with that if one is brought in while he's still with the team. But for now, they're saying to themselves, this shit, we'll keep you, but we're going to impose a very, very slight limit on you. We're going to throw in a little twist to make things exciting, they say. That's crazy. That's crazy, man. The Thunder would also get themselves involved in a trade with Atlanta. Just making it essentially to the point where both the Suns and the Hawks, so far in this postseason, or offseason rather, have been pretty active. I mean, you get this news yesterday from Shams Charania that they traded the Oklahoma City Thunder Aaron Wiggins to Atlanta in exchange for 2 second-round picks, which are the Hawks pick that they own in 2030, and the least favorable of Hawks and Lakers picks in the 2032 NBA draft. Yeah, 2032 NBA draft. Man, we are so far away from that, but shit. If it is a person that is coming straight out of high school or essentially 1 year of college, we are looking at them sending away something containing potentially a damn 8th grader in high school. Pretty much, at this point. That is what we're putting on the line to send Aaron Wiggins, who was born on January 2nd, away from this Oklahoma City team. If you're the Thunder here, you're not losing sleep over it. It's just the idea of having such a good problem that you still have to cut costs somewhere. Of course, with the extensions from the three in Holmgren, Williams, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander beginning to kick in, you're already nearing some massive penalties on your roster. Aaron Wiggins himself had not been commanding as much money, but with your roster now, considering that this is on the verge of happening, you have to do what you can to make yourself a roster of guys that you are very sure are going to appear on the NBA floor. The beauty in the Thunder system is that regardless of who comes in the game, you're getting starting caliber play from any one of them. They have 2 starting 5 caliber units for a reason, after all, and Aaron Wiggins, once upon a time, was factored into all of that. Now, aside from his 2021 year, he'd never been a truly consistent starter for this Thunder team in the first place. And a lot of times, he was called up off the bench to play and give them a sort of spark plug in that role as a man who can, at 6'5", rebound pretty well, defend pretty well, and shoot the ball really well. He averages 38% from 3 for his entire career, mainly being asked to just spot up and shoot, especially in the last few years under Dundon's system. Of course, in the championship run in 2025, he actually got a substantial amount of playing time in the overall playoff run, especially in the series against the Pacers, to ultimately close it out. It diminished in 2025 because you had all the other hot commodities coming in. The Jared McCains, the AJ Mitchells. It's just, again, the Thunder have built their team up so well, and even through those kinds of trades, are continuing to build the team out that well. Someone's going to be the odd man out at a point. Someone's going to be. It just happened to be Wiggins and countless others throughout the playoff run, where you'd expect them to be on the floor a little bit, but at the same time, you're trying to get the most out of your roster to maximize the things they can do, especially in the series against the Spurs that they ultimately lost. In that one especially, Wiggins probably could have played more, but it would have been sparingly. To that point, he'd only averaged 5.8 minutes per game in the playoffs, and it has yet to start a playoff game. Meanwhile, AJ Mitchell was able to start a few. Jared McCain was able to start a few. So that dynamic, from that standpoint, is just kind of rough for Aaron Wiggins to deal with. But being on this Atlanta team, with both those strengths in mind, could instantly give him a substantial boost that he may have been looking for. Of course, the Thunder players are all bought into the system, but man, when you get an opportunity to get an increased role elsewhere, for some of these players that fall on the bottom tier, not even in the bottom tier, but in the middle to bottom tier of talent in the NBA, for most of these guys, you'll take those opportunities any chance that you can get. And it just happened to be the perfect one for Aaron Wiggins to take a chance on. It's just, when it comes to him playing with this team, there could still be a lot of questions from that standpoint. So it's there where it's is it second round picks aren't that bad, but I don't know if that would have been the selection that they were really looking forward to getting. They probably had other ideas in mind, and by no means is Aaron Wiggins a bad option at all. Like, he's a great player to have. And that 3-point shooting, if that can carry over with this team, that's going to be perfectly beneficial to what they're trying to do. It's just like, man, oh man, oh man. For that to be one of the first trades of the postseason or offseason, it's like, dang, I don't think we saw this coming at all. But it happened. We will end up taking it. And then, with all that, got a couple hires of coaches of varying degrees of reputation in the league to this point. And then you get this. Earlier this morning, Prasam Sharanya, before I even got on here to record. Because with them, they just recently hired Dusty May as their new head coach. The national championship winning head coach of the Wolverine squad is now in the NBA. Like, I was like, oh, shit. They actually did the fucking thing. And once more, you have NBA level coaches getting passed up and lapped several times over, as some of these other teams have it in their minds to look in other directions for new hires. There had been just rumors flying around about Dusty May coming from Michigan, despite just winning the national championship and potentially moving to the NBA at some point. Those are all just rumors. I didn't think this shit was actually going to happen. And yet for the Mavericks, boy, oh boy. It is something that certainly will have the fans intrigued more than anything else right now. Of course, May and that lineup predicated a lot of their entire system around defense. It helps to have wings who are standing at nearly 6'10", all over the floor, a guard in Elliot Cadeau standing at 6'6", and a Dai Mara, a center, standing at 7'3", on that championship-winning squad for the Wolverines last season. But they were so sound defensively against most of their matchups to where even if you could question for a little bit how productive they were going to be on the other side of the ball, the defense would always keep them in the game. Nico Harrison's dumbass decided to say the defense wins championships while the Mavericks tanked all the way down the fucking power rankings, not having a shred of defense at any level. Meanwhile, Dusty May just won the national championship against a gritty UConn team and Dan Hurley, a man who himself had 2 national championship wins in just the past few years off of defense, ironically enough. Hence, you gotta look at that alone and you have to say, hey, we'll at least give the man a shot. That is a bold move from Masai Ujiri right now. And the question was going to be, who would they hire to replace Jason Kidd? They'd thrown out all these established names, the Nick Nurses and such. Those were the names that were cited here. No one even thought for a second that they could go the collegiate route and pick up a man in Dusty May, who himself has risen up the ranks over the years. Man made it all the way to the Final Four with Florida Atlantic before even being hired by the Wolverines in the first place. So, you want to talk about a guy building cultures. The man came all the way out of, I think, the Florida Atlantic team. Let me see where their basketball team is. Because obviously, for a time, they were in the Conference USA. I do not believe that they are still there right now. So let me check that out real quick. Yeah, they're in the American Conference now. But you get all the way from there, being in Dusty May's position, to then getting all the way to the Big Ten. In accomplishing that in just such a short amount of time. When you look at the hire itself in theory and the idea of bringing a coach to from college over to the NBA, there was something that I recently saw on the report because people were all over it. Adam Schefter himself is an alumni of the Wolverines, and so he also had his own reporting about it. He actually stated that the last hire of a college coach to the NBA was when Bayline came over there, also from the Wolverines, to the Cavaliers in 2019. Historically, college coaches transitioning over to the NBA don't always do that well. And in fact, some of the storied coaches in college basketball history who have made their run in the NBA were so underproductive with their respective teams that they had no choice but to return to the collegiate scene. Look no further than a guy like Rick Pitino, who I believe was the Boston Celtics coach in like the late 90s and early 2000s. And even then, that was in between him lighting it up in college, having enough attention on him to take his talents to the pros, and then not performing that well to the point where he had to return to the collegiate scene. So there is a world in which May could fall into that statistic of being called up to the NBA scene either too early or maybe just flat out not being fit for the landscape that is the NBA. And the rigor, the pacing of play, and the management that come with it. But if May, in that rise all the way from Florida Atlantic, could tell you anything, it's that in ways he may not be as fazed by that as most other coaching candidates would be. He may not be. Which could bode very well for the Mavericks. You know, like, you'd love to see Jason Kidd still be there right now because you questioned how a player like Cooper Flagg and all these other wings could operate moving forward, and you bring in Dusty May, who had gotten the most out of all those wings, with far less of an ability to produce offensively. You see just how much those threes, those fours were able to do under Dusty May, despite having far less offensive upside. And then you take a look at guys like Cooper Flagg and Najee Marshall and the things that could be improved on in both their respective games, with now having Dusty May overseeing all of it. Man, that is something crazy to think about. Like, if you're gonna, with Yaxel Lendeborg and Mraz Johnson Jr., who is especially offensively limited, if you're going to get that out of them at such a high level. The sky is the limit for Cooper Flagg, for a lot of the other wings that still remain a part of this roster on both ends of the floor, if this works out. And so, while we can only project right now because we genuinely do not know the things that Dusty May will do in the NBA right now. We don't know what kind of system he'll run. We don't know what kind of coach he'll be. But the Mavericks, after the route that was put on them, they need a person who can at least come in and showcase not only leadership, but a true ability to, I guess, just rally around everyone on the court and really build the mold, the makeup of a team with championship fabric. And who else for them better than a guy who literally just won the national championship in college, who through defense mainly was able to accomplish the feat. The Mavericks themselves throughout the last year literally started out being one of the worst defensive units of all time. They kind of turned it around, but still were not good enough. And that's despite Cooper Flagg taking those strides. That's despite Ryan Nembhard and Brandon Williams giving you solid games off the bench from time to time. That's despite Najee Marshall occasionally spurring the offense. Despite all these injuries. And then you have Kyrie Irving coming back potentially. Like, the offensive capability could be through the roof, but it still needs a lot of fine-tuning. The defense is the main thing that they are trying to work around. And, Kidd, unfortunately, in terms of the philosophical difference here, that might have been one of the reasons why they could not really agree at all. Kidd was so focused on just accepting that the season was a lost cause in a way, and just handing over the reins to Cooper Flagg that early, that we're literally just settling for that and having games where Cooper Flagg is going crazy, but the defense on the other end isn't even remotely measuring up to it, and as a result, you just have a wasted performance. Well, when every man is playing out there for themselves, it's not going to feel like much of a waste. And that is, above all else, what they are looking for Dusty May to incorporate. That's how it happened for him in the collegiate scene, and that's what he'll look to incorporate here. Exciting hire for the Mavericks. Exciting time for the Mavericks. Man, they have had themselves a tough year and some change as fans. But a hire like this could be well worth it. I tell you, it could be. So let me see right now, just to make sure that there's nothing breaking before I get off of this, because that is all of the updates up to this point. Just again, keeping my ears peeled. Is there any honest information? Is there any information at all aside from everything that I have outlined right now before I get off here? It appears not. So, for now, that will do it for this one. Like I said, the NBA draft is tomorrow. There will obviously be something about that. Keep your eyes and ears attentive to whatever, wherever you need for a potential Giannis trade, because it's coming. They're saying it's coming. You would hope it's not a pump fake like all the other times that it had been reported on. Like, if they're serious, it's coming. So just be ready. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.